South Louisiana, 1844. The night the sky turned the color of bruised flesh, something walked out of the ironwood plantation gates, and no one ever saw it again. A slave with no chains, no fear, no master behind him. Only a quiet smile like he knew something no human being should ever know. By morning, 13 people were missing, including the plantation owner's wife. The door to her bedroom was locked from the inside. The mirror was shattered, but there was no blood. Only one message written on the wall in something white and powder-like. Thinking makes U.S. free. The locals never spoke of it again. The official report described it as a tragic fire, but no flames were ever recorded. No smoke, no ashes, just disappearance. And a name, so dangerous that pastors forbade it from being spoken inside the church walls. Daniel King, the slave that should not have been able to think like that. Because according to the Louisiana Science Society, his brain structure made his intelligence biologically impossible. But every scientist who studied him either vanished or went insane. Tonight, we open the file that was sealed by the American Institute of Neurology in 1892, the one labeled Abort Research, Dangerous, Non-Human Cognitive Event, and we ask, how intelligent can a human become before they stop being controllable? Before they stop being human? Daniel King was born on a stormless night, quiet, unnaturally quiet. Midwives later said the wind seemed to stop in fear. His mother, Lydia, forced her own hand across her mouth during delivery, as if instinctively trying to muffle him, hide him, protect him. Daniel didn't cry. He just opened his eyes. Witnesses said it felt like being looked into, not looked at. Lydia claimed the baby's pupils dilated and contracted in rhythm with the flickering candle, as if the flame obeyed him, not the air. The plantation doctor examined Daniel only once. He never returned. He told the plantation master, "This child listens to thought." They laughed at him. 2 weeks later, he drowned himself in the well. Daniel walked at 6 months, spoke full sentences by 14 months. At age 3, he could repeat sermons after hearing them only once. Word for word. Perfect tone. Perfect expression. The pastor called him blessed. The overseer called him unnatural. The town called him dangerous. But the scientific community called him something far worse. Statistically impossible. Yet Ironwood Plantation didn't fear his intelligence. Not yet. They feared what happened when Daniel was asked a question, and he answered before they finished asking. By age 5, Daniel was taken every Sunday, not to church, but to a locked room behind it. A small brick chamber where whispers learned to hide. The Louisiana Science Society declared him a study asset. They spoke of him like property, like livestock, like specimen. Men in gray coats asked him to spell words he'd never read. He spelled them anyway. They asked him to recite passages he'd never seen. He recited them anyway. They asked him to solve equations that didn't exist yet on paper. He solved them anyway. But the breakthrough came when they asked him to identify objects inside sealed crates. No holes, no sound, no scent. Daniel placed his hand on the box and simply knew. Not guessed. Knew. One scientist wrote in his journal, "He does not learn. He remembers." Another wrote, "There is no development stage. He begins at completion." The lead scientist, a celebrated academic named Dr. Merrill, made the last entry ever found under his name. "We are not studying a child with intellect. We are studying the end of institutional control." That night, he packed his bags and fled Louisiana. His abandoned journal explained why. What mankind cannot control, mankind destroys. Children weren't allowed to read, but Daniel corrected the plantation owner's daughter when she mispronounced a word. She had been holding the book behind her back. He told her the word. She ran screaming. Rumors spread quickly. Southern towns were efficient that way. One man claimed Daniel spoke to him without moving his mouth. Another swore the child knew about conversations he wasn't present for. But Daniel never bragged, never boasted. He simply smiled with the apology of someone who understood pain too deeply for his age. The plantation owner considered selling him, but no trader wanted him. Not because they feared Daniel, because Daniel told each of them, accurately, the specific date of their death. And he was never wrong. A pastor suggested Daniel be baptized again, more forcefully. Another suggested shackling his hands behind his back to prevent him from touching objects he shouldn't know. But Lydia knew something the others didn't. Daniel wasn't learning from the world. The world was learning from him. The Baptist Church of Ironwood held a private tribunal, something reserved only for blasphemy or witchcraft. Daniel, only 9, stood in front of 8 grown men. One read scripture. One paced. One clutched a cross so tightly his hand bled, and he didn't notice. The head pastor asked, "Do you claim to hear the voice of God?" Daniel replied, "No." The room exhaled in relief. Then Daniel continued, "God speaks to everyone. Most just refuse to listen." The cross-bearing pastor fainted. The church labeled him sacrilegious. The plantation labeled him property. The scientists labeled him specimen. But Daniel had his own label, one he never spoke aloud. Observer. He wasn't participating. He was watching, waiting, measuring something the rest of the world was too afraid to quantify: the limits of obedience. Samuel Graves was a cruel overseer, cruel even by the era's standards. He believed pain built character. He believed Daniel needed character. Graves dragged him to the center yard. Expected screams, resistance, bargaining. Daniel simply whispered, "The whip is unnecessary." 3 hours later, Samuel Graves walked into the swamp behind the plantation, calmly, slowly, and was never seen again. They found no struggle, no body, only his hat lodged on a cypress branch. Locals said the swamp keeps what it wants. Others said Samuel Graves walked into something waiting. Only one person claimed to know why. Daniel told his mother. He finally heard himself. No one understood. But Lydia did, because she knew what Daniel's ability truly meant. He didn't control minds. He revealed them. In 1844, rumors reached Washington. A non-compliant intellectual asset. A cognitive anomaly. A slave too aware. 2 federal representatives arrived at Ironwood Plantation with sealed documents and authority. They requested custody of Daniel. The plantation owner refused, out of greed, not morality. That night, the owner's entire ledger of transactions was stolen and reappeared nailed to the church doors. Every illegal deal, every bribe, every crime, signed at the bottom, not in ink, but in ash. The signature read, "You cannot own a mind." The local sheriff stood on the church steps reading the ledger aloud, his voice trembling. The audience was silent until he reached the final entry. Murder, Elias King, 1834. Daniel's father. The plantation owner collapsed. By morning, Daniel was gone. But the missing weren't over. 13 people vanished within 3 nights. In 1860, long after Daniel disappeared, one final report surfaced, the only surviving page from the government's research on him. It read, "Subject Daniel King displays cognitive processing beyond measurable range. Not accelerated intelligence, alternative intelligence. Unknown origin, unknown limit." Then the chilling final note. Not recommended for containment. Containment attempts redefine the container. The file was labeled, "Non-human adaptive intelligence." Science didn't celebrate Daniel. Science feared him. Because the most terrifying intelligence isn't the one that solves problems. It's the one that solves people. Ironwood, Louisiana erased Daniel in a single day. The church removed the pew where he sat. Birth records accidentally burned. School attendance logs rewritten. Census lines crossed out. Neighbors forbid their children from speaking his name. Parents whispered warnings not to think about him, because thinking about him made them feel watched, evaluated, judged. A silence so heavy, it felt like part of the town fell missing with him. But the absence of truth doesn't prevent its return. 2 decades later, during the heat of the Civil War, diaries from soldiers crossed Louisiana, referencing the same rumor. An educated slave from Ironwood who travels without chain or master, appearing only when corruption festers. Some said he freed prisoners without unlocking their cells. Some said he predicted troop surrender days before generals decided. Others insisted he existed only in nightmares, shared nightmares, strangers seeing the same eyes. The legend became self-protective mythology. Whisper his name, and he appears. Contemplate injustice, and he stands behind you. Lie to yourself long enough, and he smiles. Ironwood called him a curse. History called him never documented. But minds whispered. He was a mirror we weren't meant to look into. In 1873, one man came back. Dr. Merrill, the first to study Daniel when he was 5. Except now his hair was white. His speech fragmented. He wandered Ironwood barefoot, muttering to walls. Villagers avoided him until he began etching symbols into the church doors with chalk. Frantic, non-stop. days and nights without eating. The symbol was simple, an open eye with no pupil. Under it, the phrase, "He remembers what we forgot." People mocked him until the pastor confronted Merrill, demanding to know what non-human cognition meant. Merrill laughed, not with humor, with relief. He leaned close and whispered, "Do you know what human intelligence is? A leash." The pastor stepped back. Merrill continued, "We measure IQ not to understand thought, but to restrict it. Boxes, labels, systems." Daniel was outside the box before it existed. The pastor called him blasphemous. Merrill replied, "If God created man in his image, why do we punish the ones who resemble him most?" That was Merrill's last sentence, because after speaking it, he removed the chalk from his pocket and jammed it into his own throat. He died still smiling, with teeth covered in white dust. After Merrill's death, authorities searched his room. They found nothing except a worn, hollowed Bible containing a single folded letter. It wasn't to a scientist, or family, or government. It was addressed to whoever finally listens. The letter claimed Daniel's intelligence wasn't acquired, it was awakened, triggered by trauma, generational memory, something ancient. A line written in shaky black ink. What if intelligence isn't the end of evolution, but the return to what we once were? He described Daniel's brain scan as not abnormal, but reminiscent of early hominids. Neural pathways forged like interwoven roots rather than controlled circuits. Fluid, not fixed. Adaptive, not taught. Merrill concluded, if humanity used to think like Daniel, then history isn't progress. It's containment. He ended with 3 words. Watch the institutions. The church couldn't stop the rumor of Daniel, so they tried to define it. They painted him as a demon, tempter, false prophet. They rewrote scripture interpretations to warn against forbidden knowledge. The most powerful institution in the South didn't fear science discovering Daniel's mind. They feared people discovering their own. Ancient sermons resurfaced, centuries old, about humans who could hear unspoken intent. People labeled as witches, prophets, abominations. Burned, drowned, buried alive, all sharing one trait. They saw through control. The church declared intelligence holy only when obedient. Schools taught memory, not thought. Fear replaced curiosity. Reflection became rebellion. Daniel was not the enemy. He was the reminder. Humans once questioned, and institutions never forgive questions. In 1889, children at a newly built Ironwood orphanage reported seeing a man standing silently in the rain, watching them through the fence. No umbrella, no coat, just stillness. He never moved while watched, but when they blinked, he was closer. One girl, Annabelle, whispered, "He knows my name." She had never spoken it aloud. The matron dismissed it, until the children began answering questions before being asked, predicting arguments before they sparked, knowing which visitors were dangerous without proof. Teachers reported, "They think too much. They think like him." So the orphanage locked the children in their rooms. The next morning, their doors were still locked from the outside. But the beds were empty, windows unbroken, no footprints in the mud, no forced entry, no witnesses, only one thing left behind, an open eye with no pupil drawn on the wall in chalk. The government formed a task force titled Cognitive Recovery Directive. Their objective wasn't understanding. It was retrieval. A document declassified in 1920 recorded 6 encounters with Daniel across 30 years, none resulting in capture. Soldiers who approached him described the same phenomenon. They forgot why they were there. Not confused, not distracted. They simply realized the mission wasn't their thought, but someone else's command inserted into them. One captain reported, "He asked me one question. Whose voice lies inside your decisions?" I couldn't answer. Men resigned. Men deserted. Men went home and never enlisted again. Daniel didn't fight. He unshackled their minds. And institutions have no weapon against a soldier who thinks for himself. Harvard psychologists proposed an explanation. Collective hallucination triggered by cultural trauma. They claimed intelligence beyond comprehension creates fear. Fear creates myth. Myth creates memory. But then, something inconvenient happened. The doctors began dreaming of him. Patients described the same dreams. A man standing behind them as they wrote, correcting their thoughts before they finished forming. Not altering them, clarifying, removing the noise that institutions planted. Self-generated obedience. One doctor burned his research. One resigned. One walked into the Atlantic and didn't swim back. The lead psychologist gave the final statement. If it is hallucination, it is shared by both the sick and the well, which makes it either truth or something older than truth. The open eye with no pupil appeared globally, before photography, before telephones, before possible communication. Carved into trees in Brazil, etched into prison walls in Rhode Island, found painted in ash on a monastery door in Italy, always near places where systems weakened. A priest confessing doubts, a slave planning escape, a politician reconsidering war. The symbol didn't threaten. It reminded. Someone remembers what humanity forgot. In 1902, a woman named Miriam King arrived in New York claiming she was Daniel's daughter. She was never photographed, rarely seen, but newspapers described her unsettling calm. She spoke 7 languages fluently. She read 3 books at once, page by page, one from each. She finished sentences for strangers flawlessly and correctly. Journalists asked where Daniel was. She answered, everywhere people begin to think beyond permission. They asked what he wanted. She replied, he wants you to remember your original design. They asked where he lives. She smiled. Inside the questions you're afraid to ask. Then Miriam vanished. Her hotel room untouched. Only the symbol remained on the mirror, drawn in steam from the inside. Governments fear rebellion. Churches fear doubt. Schools fear questions. Corporations fear awareness. Daniel was not a threat to the people. He was a threat to the systems built to control the people. Imagine a world where a child saw through propaganda, where a worker understood exploitation, where a soldier recognized the war was not his own. Daniel was proof. Intelligence is not gifted. It is reclaimed. And control collapses when humans reclaim what was always theirs. In 1919, after a congressional inquiry buried the final report on Daniel King, a handwritten addendum was found tucked beneath the pages. And signed, unclaimed, and censored. It read, we did not lose him. Humans cannot lose what they never owned. He did not disappear. We merely stopped qualifying those like him as human. Followed by one final sentence. Evolution never stopped. Institutions did. This documentary ends, but the story doesn't. Because the symbol continues to appear, graffiti under bridges, carved in desks, chalked on college halls, whispered in protests. Every generation rediscovers the same frightening realization. There are people who cannot be indoctrinated, people whose intelligence wasn't taught by institutions, but awakened by injustice. Maybe Daniel King was the first. Maybe not. Maybe his disappearance was an escape. Maybe it was return. Return to the human design unfiltered by fear. You might dismiss this. Laugh, scoff, scroll away. Until the day you think a thought that isn't allowed. A question that wasn't taught. A realization that isn't approved. And you feel something. Someone. Not watching you. But waiting. Because the story of Daniel King isn't about the boy they tried to silence. It's about the moment humans remember. Thinking makes us free. Obeying makes us forget. This file is no longer forgotten. The question is, now that you remember, what will you do with the thought that wasn't given to you, but born inside you?